Imagine taking a pill. And for the person sitting right next to you taking the exact same dose, it triggers the single most beautiful, euphoric, life-altering experience of their entire life.
Right.
But for you, it triggers a waking nightmare. I mean, the walls close in, paranoia just completely takes over, and you are plunged into this agonizing psychological ordeal.
It's terrifying.
It is. And why does that happen? For decades, people have blamed the environment, like the music playing in the room, the lighting, the company you keep. But what if the real architect of that nightmare is what if it's just you?
It's a deeply unsettling thought. The idea that our fundamental personality structure, like the invisible wiring of our brains, might just completely dictate how we handle reality-altering states.
Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we've curated a stack of research just for you, focusing on this fascinating 2017 paper from researchers at Johns Hopkins University. It's titled Neuroticism and Challenging Experiences with Psilocybin Mushrooms. And our mission today is to figure out why the exact same chemical compound can produce, heaven for one person and hell for another.
Yeah, and to set the mood for unpacking something this complex, I've actually updated my virtual backdrop. I went with this sort of classic, dimly lit library aesthetic, but if you look closely at the mahogany bookshelves, the grain of the wood is slowly shifting into these subtle kaleidoscopic patterns.
Oh, I see that. Yeah, it's perfectly disorienting, which definitely fits what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
So the researchers at Hopkins really wanted to map out this unpredictable terrain. And to do that, they ran 2 massive surveys to finally find out if there's a hard data-driven link between specific personality types and these terrifying bad trips. But I mean, before we even look at the drugs, we need to understand the psychological yardstick they're using to measure the human mind here.
Right, so we have to start with personality psychology, and specifically the 5-factor model, which is, it's the gold standard in the field. It basically argues that human personality can be broken down into 5 broad dimensions. Extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
And we definitely aren't going to spend equal time on all 5 of those today. We are zeroing in on the absolute star of this Johns Hopkins paper, which is neuroticism. Or, if you prefer a slightly more optimistic framing, it's inverse emotional stability.
Let's define neuroticism precisely, though. Because in everyday conversation, people use the word neurotic to describe someone who is maybe just a bit fussy or, anxious about being late.
Like Woody Allen or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in clinical psychology, it is much heavier than that. Neuroticism is defined as this profound propensity toward negative emotionality. It's an ingrained difficulty in coping with stress and a really hardwired tendency to react negatively to environmental friction.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's like, if your mind is a security system, being high in neuroticism is like having a car alarm that's set just a little too sensitively.
I like that.
Right, like a slight breeze hits or a truck rumbles by down the street, and suddenly the sirens are just blaring. The alarm is doing its job, technically, but it's reacting with maximum intensity to a relatively minor stressor.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. People high in neuroticism have a much lower threshold for threat detection. So when an environment becomes slightly ambiguous or stressful, their mental car alarm just blares, flooding them with negative emotion. Now, take that highly sensitive baseline and introduce a massive, fundamentally reality-altering stressor.
Like a huge dose of psilocybin mushrooms.
Exactly.
So if someone's internal alarm goes off easily with everyday friction, like a tight deadline at work or an awkward text message, how does that actually manifest when their entire perception of time and space starts melting?
Well, this is where the paper's core theory comes into play. In therapeutic psychedelic research, there is this really consistent clinical instruction given to volunteers during their preparation phase. They are explicitly told to simply let go.
Just to surrender to whatever their brain shows them.
Precisely. If a terrifying image or a buried trauma bubbles up, the instruction is to walk toward it. Do not fight it. Minimize your negative reactivity. But, by definition, a highly neurotic individual lacks that specific coping mechanism. They cannot easily let go.
Oh, wow. It sounds almost like a psychological Chinese finger trap.
What do you mean?
Well, the defining trait of neuroticism is poor coping and negative reactivity, right? So when the drug shows them something scary, they pull away. They fight it. And just like a finger trap, the harder you fight the psychedelic experience, the tighter and more agonizing the grip of the panic becomes.
Yes. That is exactly the mechanism at work. The resistance to the loss of control turns a difficult moment into a spiraling catastrophe. But, theories about finger traps and car alarms are just theories. The Johns Hopkins researchers needed to actually prove this mechanism was real.
Which is tough because humans are notoriously bad at self-reporting their own panic. Like, how do you actually measure a nightmare? You can't exactly inject thousands of people with psychedelics in a controlled lab, try to induce a terrible time, and stick them in an MRI machine while they're terrified. Ethically, that's a total non-starter.
Oh, it absolutely is. So the researchers went with a retrospective approach for Study 1. They launched this massive online survey and gathered 1,993 participants. But they didn't ask about their average experiences. The survey specifically instructed these people to focus exclusively on their single worst bad trip.
Just the absolute bottom.
Right, the most psychologically difficult or challenging session they had ever endured on an active dose of psilocybin.
And reading through the methodology, the researchers were incredibly aggressive with their exclusions. They needed really pristine data.
They did.
You had to be over 18, you had to speak fluent English so nothing was lost in translation, and crucially, you could not have mixed substances. No alcohol, no cannabis, just the psilocybin.
Yeah, and they also excluded anyone who had this experience inside an official clinical trial. They wanted wild, uncontrolled, real-world data.
Okay, so we have nearly 2,000 people staring back at the worst psychological ordeal of their lives. What tools do you even use to quantify that?
They relied on two primary psychological instruments. First, to measure the baseline personality, they used the TPI, which stands for the 10-item personality inventory. It's a very fast, very efficient survey that calculates a score for emotional stability.
And remember, emotional stability is just the inverse of neuroticism.
Right. A low score here means a highly neurotic personality.
Okay, and to measure the actual nightmare itself.
They used the CEQ, the Challenging Experience Questionnaire.
I want to spend a second on the CEQ because it is brilliant. It doesn't just ask a binary, did you have a bad time, yes or no. It breaks a bad trip down into 7 distinct, deeply unsettling subfactors.
It's very specific.
Yeah, we're talking about fear, grief, insanity, isolation, death, physiological distress, and paranoia.
It basically gives researchers a high-resolution map of exactly how the mind is suffering.
Let's make that real for you, the listener, because insanity isn't just feeling a little weird. In the context of a bad trip, the insanity factor is the absolute terrifying conviction that you have permanently broken your brain and you are never going back to normal.
Which is horrifying.
And the isolation factor is the feeling of being completely cut off from the human race, just floating in a void.
And when you look at the raw data comparing those CEQ scores against the personality scores, the relationship is just stark. Emotional stability was significantly negatively associated with 6 out of those 7 subfactors, plus the total overall severity score.
Meaning, the lower your emotional stability, so the higher your neuroticism, the more intensely you felt the fear, the isolation, the paranoia, and the grief. The Chinese finger trap clamped down on almost every single metric.
Exactly. It was a sweeping correlation. The neurotic baseline amplified the suffering across the board.
Wait, you said 6 out of 7 factors. Here's where it gets really interesting. Look at the death factor. The literal feeling that your physical body is dying. In Study 1, the data showed that specific terror wasn't linked to neuroticism at all.
No, it wasn't.
It was actually linked to a totally different personality trait, openness. Why in the world would being a highly open, curious person make you feel like you're dying on mushrooms?
It's a bizarre statistical quirk, but what's fascinating here is that it highlights why moving to a tool like the CEQ was necessary in the first place. Older, clunkier psychiatric questionnaires used incredibly vague categories, like they'd measure something called the dread of ego dissolution.
Which sounds poetic, but scientifically, what does that even mean?
Exactly, it's muddy. Is ego dissolution the fear of going crazy or the fear of physically dying? By splitting the questionnaire into 7 laser-focused factors, researchers can finally catch these weird anomalies.
But as for why openness triggered the death factor?
Well, in the vacuum of Study 1, it was an unsolved mystery.
Well, as I was reading this first study, my inner devil's advocate kind of flared up. I found myself looking at this solid link between neuroticism and a bad trip and thinking, what about the set and setting?
Ah, the classic counter-argument. You're wondering about the environment.
Yes. Imagine a highly anxious, highly neurotic person. They're at a loud, chaotic party. They cave to peer pressure and take a massive dose of a drug they haven't researched. Isn't it incredibly obvious they're going to have a terrifying time?
I mean, yes.
So what if the bad trip is just being caused by the intention behind taking the drug and the chaotic environment rather than the personality trait itself?
The Johns Hopkins team anticipated that exact critique. So in study 1, they also asked participants about their intentions. Why did you take the mushrooms that day? And your intuition was partially correct.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the data showed that individuals with higher neuroticism leaned slightly more toward taking the drug because of peer pressure, and they were, less likely to take it for deep, serious psychological exploration.
I knew it! So the bad trip is just a result of a bad environment and bad intentions.
Not quite. The researchers ran these complex statistical models, specific analyses 3 and 4 in the paper, to see if intention acted as a moderator. Basically, the question they asked the data was, if a highly neurotic person takes mushrooms for the absolute right reasons, like in a quiet place, for serious self-exploration, does that erase the bad trip?
And the data said,
It didn't matter. Intention did not act as a moderator. Even if the highly neurotic individual approached the experience like a monk seeking enlightenment, their baseline personality still dictated a harder, more challenging trip. The core wiring of their brain overrode their good intentions.
that is wild. The car alarm goes off even if you park the car inside a silent monastery.
It's a really powerful finding. But in science, a single internet survey with a weird, unexplained anomaly about the death factor isn't exactly enough to rewrite the textbooks. You need replication.
Which brings us to study 2. They launched a second, completely separate online survey, gathering 981 new participants. But I noticed they completely changed their measurement tools for this second round. If you're trying to replicate a study, wouldn't changing the tools totally skew the comparison?
It's a fair question.
Like, how can they claim total replication if they threw out the original measuring stick?
Well, in study 1, they used the 10-item TIPI test. Think of the 10-item test like a Polaroid picture. It's fast, it gives you a decent snapshot of someone's personality, but it's a bit blurry around the edges. For study 2, they upgraded to the 44-item Big 5 inventory, or the BFI.
Ah, so they went from a Polaroid to like a 4K high-definition camera.
Exactly. The 44-item test asks much more nuanced, overlapping questions to map the exact contours of someone's neuroticism. It measures the trait directly, rather than just calculating a general emotional stability score. They wanted to see if the correlation held up under extreme, high-definition scrutiny.
And the results held.
Total replication. Even with the rigorous 44-item test, high neuroticism was undeniably linked to 6 of the 7 CEQ factors and the overall bad trip score.
Okay, but what about that weird anomaly from study 1? The link between being open to new experiences and feeling like you're dying.
Under the 4K resolution of the new test, it vanished completely.
Just gone.
Gone. The researchers concluded that the study 1 death anomaly was just statistical noise, just a fluke. But the link between a neurotic personality and a terrifying psychological ordeal, that correlation was built out of concrete.
So across nearly 3,000 people and 2 massive surveys, the science is pretty clear. If your personality defaults to negative emotionality and poor stress coping, your risk for an agonizing psychedelic experience skyrockets. But we need to be honest with you, the listener, about a massive blind spot in this research.
We definitely need to talk about the brick wall of causality.
Right. Both of these surveys rely on what scientists call cross-sectional data. That means the researchers just took a snapshot of the participants as they exist today. The math proves that high neuroticism and a history of bad trips are heavily entangled.
Deeply entangled.
But the data cannot tell us which one came first. Did the neurotic personality cause the bad trip? Or did enduring a nonstop 8-hour psychological nightmare make the person permanently more neurotic afterward?
Honestly, this is where the paper hits a brick wall. We mathematically cannot prove the direction of the arrow. If someone goes through a deeply traumatic event, even a pharmacologically induced one, it makes perfect sense that their brain might permanently tweak their internal car alarm to be far more sensitive to future threats.
It really does.
It's incredibly frustrating as a researcher to have this massive correlation, but no definitive proof of the genesis.
Which makes sense when you consider human nature, right? Trauma changes us. But this uncertainty also shines a light on a really strange contradiction in the scientific literature. I was reading the background for this deep dive, and prior to this 2017 Johns Hopkins paper, there was a massive pool analysis published back in 2012 by a researcher named Studeris.
Oh, the Studeris analysis.
Studeris looked at 23 different experimental studies, combining all their data. And that 2012 analysis found absolutely zero link between neuroticism and bad trips. Nothing.
Not even a blip on the radar.
Wait, stop. How is that possible? How can a massive 2012 analysis say there is zero link, and then Johns Hopkins comes out in 2017 with 3,000 people saying the link is undeniable? Someone has to be wrong here.
It's not that someone is wrong. It's about the fundamental difference in how the data was collected. The 2012 Studers data didn't come from wild internet surveys. It came from highly structured, heavily controlled clinical laboratory environments. And here is the defining detail. Those laboratory studies intentionally excluded highly neurotic people from even walking through the door.
You're kidding. They just banned them from the science.
They did. Anyone whose neuroticism score was more than 2 standard deviations above the norm was disqualified.
Okay, let's translate 2 standard deviations into plain English. That essentially means they took the top 5% of the most anxious, highly stressed, easily overwhelmed people in the population and said, you are not allowed to participate.
Precisely. They pre-filtered the data. If you ban the most neurotic people from the building, of course you aren't going to find a link between extreme neuroticism and bad trips.
Okay, well, that explains part of it, but what about the people with average or slightly above average neuroticism who did make it into those 2012 labs? Why didn't they have bad trips?
Because of the safety net. In those controlled lab settings, participants are surrounded by heavy interpersonal support. They have trained psychological guides sitting beside them for the entire 8-hour experience. Before they ever take the drug, they go through extensive preparation on exactly how to let go, and afterward, they go through deep integration therapy to process whatever they saw.
So the environment and the support system actually neutralized the neuroticism.
It appears so.
Mm-hmm.
The clinical structure basically acted as a psychological buffer, absorbing the panic before it could trigger that Chinese finger trap.
So what does this all mean for you? Why should you care about the difference between an uncontrolled internet survey and a highly controlled lab study from a decade ago?
Because of the revolution happening in modern psychiatry right now, psychedelics aren't just party drugs anymore. They are currently undergoing massive fast-track clinical trials as potential treatments for severe mood disorders, like treatment-resistant depression and profound addiction.
And what do people suffering from severe treatment-resistant depression and lifelong addiction almost always have in common?
Incredibly high rates of baseline neuroticism.
Ah.
Yeah, these are clinical conditions literally defined by negative emotionality, overwhelming anxiety, and an inability to cope with life's stressors.
The puzzle pieces are snapping together now.
If the psychiatric field is preparing to use these incredibly powerful, reality-bending pharmacological tools on highly vulnerable, highly neurotic populations, they need to be wide awake to this Hopkins data. A patient walking into a clinic today with severe depression is not the same as a healthy, relaxed volunteer in a 2012 safety study. The depressed patient is uniquely, fundamentally vulnerable to having a terrifying reaction.
Which means the medical protocol has to adapt. If you have a highly neurotic patient, you can't just hand them a pill, put on some nice music, and hope for the best.
Not at all. They might require weeks of preparation time before the session ever begins.
Yeah.
They might need an entirely different, specialized level of coaching to help them learn the mechanics of letting go. And they will undoubtedly need much more intensive integration therapy afterward.
The entire goal being to ensure that a challenging experience doesn't end up traumatizing them further, causing them to pull away from the treatment and completely derail the potential therapeutic benefits.
It's about recognizing the vulnerability of the mind and building a custom scaffold to protect it.
That is absolutely fascinating. To briefly recap the journey we've been on today, we took a deep dive into 2 distinct surveys, analyzing the absolute worst, most agonizing psychedelic experiences of nearly 3,000 people. And the data clearly proved that having a highly neurotic personality, having that hypersensitive internal alarm system, directly acts as a massive amplifier for the fear, grief, and paranoia of a psilocybin experience.
It's a profound look into the hidden mechanics of human suffering. And it leaves me with a final thought I want to pose to you, the listener. We just established that highly supportive, structured clinical settings, the ones with trained guides and explicit instructions on surrendering, seemingly erase the bad trips, even for people who had baseline neuroticism. They provided an impenetrable safety net.
The guides actually taught them how to escape the Chinese finger trap.
Exactly. So think about this. If we know that specific types of interpersonal support and specific psychological letting go preparations can successfully shield a sensitive, highly neurotic mind from a massive, overwhelming pharmacological stressor, like a psilocybin trip, could we use that?
Use it how?
Could psychologists reverse engineer those exact same preparation tactics and therapies not just for people taking psychedelics at a clinic, but to help highly neurotic individuals navigate the everyday, non-pharmacological stressors of modern life.
That is an incredible thought. I mean, if you can teach someone's brain to successfully surrender to a reality-bending drug, maybe you can teach them to gracefully surrender to a terrible day at work or a sudden moment of deep, unexpected anxiety.
Exactly.
Maybe we can learn how to rewire the sensitivity of that car alarm for good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on your deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep exploring the depths of the mind, and we'll catch you on the next one.